All rise, veuillez vous lever. The International Criminal Court is now in session. L'audience de la Cour pénale internationale est ouverte. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
Good morning, everyone. Court officer, please call the case.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. Situation in the Central African Republic 2, in the case of the prosecutor versus Alfred Yekatom and Patrice Edouard Ngai ssona, case reference ICC 0114-0118, and for the record, we are in open session.
Thank you very much. I think today it makes sense to ask for the appearances again, perhaps. Mr. Van der Poel, please, for the prosecution.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning to you. Good morning to everyone. Today, the prosecution is represented by Olivia Straven, Lucio Garcia, Yassine Mospa, Manuchitra Prathavan, Pierre Belbenoit Avik, Maria Bertenikova, Leila Haxius, Sylvie Wakchum, and myself, Kwaku Lenko. Good morning.
Thank you. Ms. Masida next for the victims.
Good morning, Mr. President, Your Honors. For the victims of the other crimes appearing today, Ms. Elizabeth Rabesandatana, Mr. Orcholona Ransetsek, Mr. Innocent Poko, Mr. Enrique Carnero Royo, Ms. Ejim Kim, Mr. Alexis Larivière, and Ms. Eveline Ombeni, and myself, Paulina Masita.
Thank you. Mr. Sepu next.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. The composition of the team of representing the former child soldiers is the same as yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dimitri, the defense of Mr. Yekatom.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone. Mr. Yekatom is present in the courtroom. He's represented today by Ms. Anta Gisse, Ms. Yusra Lamkadam, Ms. Sabrine Bessat, Ms. Sarah Bafadel, Mr. Guillaume Suzuki, Ms. Alexandra Baer, Mr. Florent Pages-Granier, Ms. Léa Benoit, Ms. Lina Hami, and myself, Milan Dimitri.
Thank you. And then we turn to the defense of Mr. Ngai ssona. Mr. Knopf, please.
Morning, Mr. President. Your Honors, good morning. Morning, everyone in the courtroom. The defense team, Mr. Ngai ssona, this morning is composed of Ms. Despina Eleftheriou Lorian van der Leer in the second row. Second row, Ms. Nina Dijk, Associate to Counsel, Matthias Goffet, Melissa Beaulieu on the left side, Ms. Sarah Pedroso. Good morning.
Thank you very much. We give now the floor Ms. Dimitri for the defense of Mr. Yekatom and their closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we start, just a few housekeeping matter. The way we separated the closing statement, with Your Honor's leave, we would probably break maybe 10 to 15 minutes before 1, and then the second part could be in the afternoon.
Well, we are fine with that, and we also suggest today that we shorten the lunch break so we have our flexibility in the afternoon.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And the second matter, Mr. President, I spoke to Mr. Van der Poel yesterday, so we have 4 hours and a half. With Your Honor's leave, I would have about 10 minutes in private session to fully address a point prosecution made on P1339.
Well, I assume when you suggest that there is a good reason for it. 10 minutes is okay, but you know everybody has an interest to have the closing arguments as much in open session than possible. Yeah? But it's also fine. Specifically when you have talked with Mr. Van der Poel. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Your Honors. Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to appear before you today, and it's a privilege to have led this defense team for the past 5 years. Through today's presentation, I will seek to demonstrate why the prosecution's narrative in this case cannot be trusted. And this stems from the manner in which they conducted their investigation, the way they questioned witnesses, and the approach they adopted in constructing their final brief and their closing statement. And a consistent pattern emerges in the prosecution's conduct. A pattern driven by a singular focus on securing a conviction, often at the expense of fairness and accuracy. From the outset of their investigation, when witnesses provided clarifications or nuanced responses, the prosecution consistently opted for the most incriminating interpretation. But it's only incriminating when they twist the evidence, when they disregard context or clarifications provided by witnesses, clarifications that undermine their narrative. And I will substantiate today this first point by using witness statements compared to court testimony referenced in the prosecution's brief. And I will then address my second point, where I will discuss how the prosecution used extensively the witness statement of P1339 to feed him the evidence they needed to construct their brief against Mr. Yekatom. And this approach of exploiting ambiguities while deliberately avoiding clarification that could undermine their case was evident not only in the investigative phase, but also in the courtroom while they were questioning witnesses. And this observation will form part of the foundation of my third point, which I will expand today by demonstrating how these ambiguities were similarly leveraged by the prosecution, in particular in relation to the North and the South coordination. And fourth, I will demonstrate how this tactic extended to their interpretation of other types of evidence, such as audio-video material or call data records. And fifth, I will also show how the same approach is reflected in their brief. They made deliberate, selective choices, disregarding clear evidence during court proceedings when it undermined their argument. And this is shown particularly on their fixation of a conviction in relation to P0954. Following my presentation, my colleagues, Ms. Gise, Ms. Bafadel, and Mr. Suzuki will further address Your Honor. Ms. Gise will address the Yanwara school base. Mr. Suzuki will address the term anti-balaka. He will briefly address Catin, as well as the PK9 and Baiki axis. And Ms. Bafadel will address Your Honors on Mr. Yekatom's individual criminal responsibility as alleged by the prosecution. At the end of our presentation, I will conclude our submissions with a very brief analysis of count 29, and where I'll highlight how the prosecution's relentless pursuit for conviction and their deliberate avoidance of clarification that could weaken their case was equally evident. Your Honors will recall how, during my opening statement, I highlighted how, throughout the trial, the prosecution failed to rigorously test their evidence. And their refusal to test or to thoroughly test their evidence or address ambiguities or even acknowledging damaging evidence underscores a calculated effort to gain a tactical advantage. And they consistently employed deliberate obfuscation and conflated terms such as Muslim and anti-balaka. And when a witness attempted to clarify a point, the prosecution either tried to avoid addressing the clarification or disregarded it altogether. And I want to take the example of prosecution witness 1839. where the prosecution exploited her lack of clarity and the conflation of issues when she was discussing Muslims and alleged instructions by Mr. Yekatom. And you heard the prosecution on Monday and Tuesday repeating two extracts from P 1839 in relation to what Mr. Yekatom would have said in relation to Muslims. And fortunately, when P 1839 testified, Your Honors will recall that her prior recorded testimony was a full recorded transcript that allowed me to address and clarify various points during our examination on behalf of Mr. Yekatom. And you will recall, and you'll see this from the slide, the next slide before Your Honors, on slide 2, that she admitted referring to Muslim during her interview with the prosecution, while in fact she meant Seleka. She meant Seleka who were burning houses. She meant Seleka who had weapons, but she used the term Muslim. And Your Honors will also recall that because we had a full transcribed, recorded prior statement of P 1839, a significant portion of our examination was to have her confirm key aspects of her evidence, of her prior recorded testimony during the court proceedings, key aspects that were avoided by the prosecution. And in contrast to the prosecution's pattern, we addressed with P 1839 key points of her evidence and the essential aspects of her testimony. You'll also recall that at some point we repeatedly asked the same question 3 times to obtain a clear and an unequivocal answer regarding Mr. Yekatom's instructions. And this is at transcript 174 from page 78 onwards. But more troubling is the prosecution actively sought to obstruct our attempt to clarify her evidence. And this reveals a clear apprehension of potentially exculpatory and damaging responses. You will recall how, at some point, I was questioning 1839 on whether or not Mr. Yekatom or Mr. Habib Beina had ever said to attack Muslim civilians, and they objected. They didn't want me to obtain that clarification. And fortunately, you, if I can use that term, overruled the objection and allowed me to ask that question. And she gave a damaging answer, damaging to the prosecution's case, despite their attempt to obstruct it. And today, that answer, they qualify it in their brief as a red herring, showing how they're really not interested in the truth, but simply a conviction, because they will give every attempt to put aside anything that can disturb key findings of their case. And you can see that attempt at paragraph 446 of the prosecution's brief. Now, these clarifications that we obtained for from 1839 during our examination were made possible because her prior recorded testimony was fully recorded. But this advantage of having a full recorded prior testimony was absent from other prosecution witnesses. P1339, for instance, waived his right to have his prior recorded statement transcribed, recorded. And other witnesses, they were not suspect, so they provided statements which were a summary sanitized by the prosecution investigators, where it lacked essential context, and there's no detailed references to the question posed by prosecution investigators, nor is there any comprehensive procès verbal. You don't even know how a specific subject was approached by the prosecution investigators in these summary statements. And our objective today is to show that how these prior recorded statements cannot be trusted when relied upon by the prosecution. And many witnesses recanted what they said in their statement or clarified what they said in their statement. And we gave examples in our final brief at paragraph 152 and 536. And others further clarified or recanted part of their prior recorded statement in this courtroom while testifying. But the prosecution disregarded this. They continued to rely on the prior recorded statement made, sanitized, summarized by their prosecutor investigators, who sometimes were Anglophones working in a Francophone country, because their focus was to secure conviction, even at the expense of live evidence presented before this chamber. And this will form part of my second point, where I want to take 3 examples to show how they continue to rely on prior recorded statement and disregard in court testimony. And the first example is with witness P1990, and it's on slide 4 before your honors. As you can notice from the left-hand side of the slide, the prosecution relies on, they quote 1990 at paragraph 578 of their final brief to support the sentence that the Yekatom group attacked PK5 on several occasions. And this sentence at paragraph 578 is in the middle of a paragraph where they describe how PK5 is an enclave, where they describe how PK5 is an enclave where hundreds and hundreds of internal displaced civilian Muslims seek refuge. So they're implying in paragraph 578 that Mr. Yekatom attacked PK5 and therefore attacked Muslim civilians. And they rely on paragraph 28 of 1990's statement. And paragraph 28 is where, in his prior recorded statement, he claims that because of the bad behavior of his elements, Mr. Yekatom was encouraging them to attack PK5. Now, what did he say when he came and testified before your honors? We questioned him on paragraph 28. He said that he was not an eyewitness to any attack on PK5. And he said that it was des gens. Some people were attacking PK5, and that's what he heard. He is incapable of stating who specifically, and he's not saying that it's Mr. Yekatom. But they disregarded that clarification because they wanted paragraph 28. And that's what they quoted in their brief. Now, a second example is with witness P0954, which is on the right-hand side of your honors PowerPoint. At paragraph 703 of the prosecution's brief, they claim that 0954 confirmed that Muslim civilians fled for fear of being violently attacked, targeted by Yekatom's group. And they rely on paragraph 96 of P0954's statement. And in 96, he says in his prior recorded statement that Mr. Yekatom carried out attacks from one village to another to attack Muslim. Now, when he came to testify, we questioned him on this paragraph, on the term, what did he meant by attacking village per village? And he specifies, he agrees that he meant Seleka, that Mr. Yekatom was attacking village after village the Seleka to grab their weapons, armed Seleka. But the prosecution disregards this clarification. They continue to rely on paragraph 96 to claim that Mr. Yekatom would have attacked Muslim civilians and that's why they fled. But worse, they say in paragraph 703 of their final brief that P0954 confirmed that it's Muslim civilians, while paragraph 96 doesn't even have the word civilians, in addition to having clarified that he meant Seleka. I want to use a third example with your honors, and this is with witness 1813, slide 5. In his statement, in his prior recorded statement, there was a sentence where he would have said that young boys from 10 years and older were at the Sikia and Pisa roadblocks, barriers. When he came and testified, it's you, Mr. President, who sought clarification on paragraph 21. You wanted to know what was his base of knowledge for saying that they were 10 years and older. And what did he say? He said there were young people younger than 18. That's what he says. So you have 10 years and older. He testifies, he says, younger than 18. What do they choose in their brief? 10 years and older, because that's more incriminating. And they disregard the clarification you obtained when the witness testified. And this is why we're saying, Mr. President, Your Honors, that they're attempting to secure a conviction by avoiding clarifications, by avoiding witness live testimony. And this is why you shouldn't trust prior recorded statements obtained by the prosecution in this case. And it brings me to my next point. The excessive use of P1339's prior recorded statement by prosecution counsel. They cling tightly to P1339's statement because they viewed him as essential to achieving a conviction, regardless of his lack of credibility. And the disproportionate weight they placed on 1339 in their brief and during their closing statement on Monday and Tuesday exemplifies how the pursuit for truth has been sidelined in favor of promoting 1339's credibility by even claiming that he showed his commitment to telling the unvarnished truth. This sentence alone, at paragraph 589 of their brief, shows how following the prosecution's agenda requires leaning on blatantly unreliable evidence. And Your Honors are familiar with our position on 1339. It's outlined in our brief, and we were very clear. We requested Your Honors to completely disregard his evidence. And I do not wish today to revisit the points we made in our brief on 1339. What I want to do, though, is to approach him from a different angle, focusing on the disproportionate reliance by the prosecution on 1339, on his statement, and the repetitive recycling of his testimony, and the numerous instances where his evidence is used in isolation by the prosecution in their brief and during their closing statement. Your Honors, you highlighted more than once the importance of demeanor and of spontaneous accounts from witnesses. And you also, and this is at filing 685, and you also underlined that it's preferable not to introduce questions as if what's contained in the prior recorded statement is the definite truth. And you said that in transcript 154, page 57, English version. Now I want to use those words, those advice, those rulings, and conduct an exercise by using paragraph 417 of the prosecution's brief. And it's on slide 7. And you'll notice on paragraph 417 that they claim that Mr. Yekatom instructed his elements that the purpose of the training was so they could kill Muslims and Seleka because all Muslims were Seleka. Now let's try and look at the source of that evidence. Prosecution counsel, completely disregarding your ruling about spontaneity and about not introducing a question by using the statement as the definite truth. He fed that answer to 1339. Disregarding that a few minutes earlier, and this is at the bottom of your Honor's screen, a few minutes earlier, 1339, when talking about the training, was saying that he didn't give details about the training. No explanation were provided about the purpose of the training. But prosecution counsel didn't want that answer. So he fed him that the purpose of the training was so he would kill Muslims and Seleka. And that's the source of paragraph 417 of their brief. Let's take the second part of the sentence. Because all Muslims were Seleka. That too was fed by prosecution counsel. The same pattern of suggestive questioning. And this assertion was presented to 1339, even though a few minutes earlier, when he's talking about an enemy, he's talking about an enemy capable of killing, an armed adversary. But prosecution counsel wanted the answer to then take it and put it in its final brief. So he fed him the answer in a leading manner. Do you recall Mr. Yekatom saying to kill all Muslims because all Muslims were Seleka? That's the source of the evidence. And then what did they do? And it's on the next slide, slide 9. Slide 9 serves as a clear example of their unwavering reliance on P1339's testimony. The same sentence fed by prosecution counsel, used repetitively in their final brief, recycled over and over again to cover a wide range of essential elements. And this over-reliance underscores their strategy to overextended, limited evidence to support critical aspects of their case. And you can also see this on slide 10 with another sentence that was recycled over and over. I want to move to slide 11. The instructions fed to 1339 by the prosecution that the directive would have been to kill all Muslims because Muslims were Seleka had to be framed as a standing order for their case to sustain, as they claim, the remaining charges against Mr. Yekatom. That sentence, too, was fed by prosecution counsel. That's the source of the evidence. And that sentence, too, you can see it on slide 12, was recycled in their brief. To a lesser extent, but it was recycled. And all those sentences, the one we just saw in the previous slide and the standing instruction, were repeated Monday and Tuesday by prosecution counsel and by victims counsel, Ms. Masida. And in addition to that, we would invite Your Honor to have a close look at prosecution's brief and to look at the number of occasions they use the evidence of 1339 as the sole source to support essential elements of their brief against Mr. Yekatom. On a number of occasions, there are several paragraphs where he's used as the sole source. And this, Your Honors, the repeated recycling of the same sentence fed by prosecution counsel highlights, in our opinion, respectfully, the weakness of their case against Mr. Yekatom. And the number of times prosecution had to lead 1339 with the answers he wanted demonstrates 1339's inability to independently provide a narrative. And this is the witness they claim to be credible and coherent. And this brings me to another point in relation to 1339. And it's on slide 14 and 15, where they asked a similar question about instructions or directive for the 5th of December attack, not less than 9 times. 9 times. Because they needed him so desperately to say that an order was given by Mr. Yekatom to attack Boeing on the 5th of December. And they repeated the question not because it was not clear, not because the question was ambiguous, not because the witness asked for the question to be repeated over and over again. They repeated it because they did not get the answer they wanted. And they repeated it despite the fact, and I'm going to ask my colleague to go back to slide 14, despite the fact that on the 3rd occasion, 1339 said, "I keep repeating you since Friday, I did not hear." And finally, as you can see from slide 16, having not been satisfied after 9 times of the answer they obtained, prosecution counsel had to suggest again to 1339. He fed him the answer. So, Rambo told us that we would attack the Muslim and the Seleka at the Boeing market. This is again a witness they call credible and coherent. I want to make another point in relation to 1339. And I want to take paragraph 441 of the prosecution's brief, and it's on slide 17. So at paragraph 441, they claim that Mr. Yekatom's elements killed Muslim civilians in Boeing and Catin on the 5th of December, and that this was pursuant to Mr. Yekatom's order, which is corroborated by 1339's testimony. So when I was looking at the brief, I thought, let's see who corroborates this. So I looked at footnote 905, and it refers to paragraph 552 to 554 of the prosecution's brief, as you can see from Your Honor's screen. And 552 to 554 has 4 footnotes. So the first footnote refers to 2 videos. I watched those videos. There's nothing in those videos that suggests that Mr. Yekatom or his elements killed Muslim civilians in Boeing and Catin during the 5th of December attack, as alleged at paragraph 441. That's not what those videos are about. And then when you look at that footnote 1215, they refer to the evidence of 1786 and 1647. Now, the evidence of 1786 and 1647 that's quoted in that footnote 1215 only serves to identify the individuals that we see on the 2 videos that are quoted in that footnote. Videos who has nothing to do with Mr. Yekatom attacking Muslim civilians in Boeing and Catin on the 5th of December. So I went to the next footnote, 1216. They refer to the evidence of 1705. That extract of the evidence of 1705 talks about the 5th of December attack in general and Muslim being killed, not specifically about Mr. Yekatom attacking Muslim civilians in Boeing and Catin on the 5th of December. So what are we left with? 2 footnotes, 1217, 1218. And they both refer to who? 1339. So they manufacture an illusion of corroboration for 1339, but when you go back to the source, they're actually referring to 1339. So he corroborates himself. That's how weak their case is against Mr. Yekatom. To strengthen the non-credible evidence of 1339, especially on the Boeing market, they resorted to eliminating obstacles. So when the prosecution was informed about the existence of a crime-based witness who would contradict their star witness, 1339, they chose not to seize the opportunity to meet her. And this is defense witness 4011. Although I had highlighted the importance of her testimony as early as November 23 during my opening statement. And today, when you look at their brief, they made a selection. So they believe her on the Boeing mosque, but they don't believe her on the Boeing market, on what she has to say, what she saw about Hassan Mahamat, Hassan Delegué's combatant status. And they're saying that, well, we were deprived of questioning her. They had the opportunity to meet her. There was a protocol in place. They didn't seize that opportunity. But even if your honors were minded to give credit to their argument, what they conveniently omit to in this portion of their brief, where they discuss the Boeing market and Hassan Delegué, so this is paragraph 553 to 564 of their brief, what they omit to tell you is that there's another witness who's even more damaging to their case in relation to the combatant status of Hassan Delegué. And this is witness 0884, prosecution witness, who corroborates defense witness 4011. But whether the omission was intentional or not is irrelevant. His absence from their brief is significant because prosecution witness 0884 was fatal to their case in relation to the Boeing market. And we discussed this further in our brief at paragraph 394. But on Monday, they made an attempt to have you disregard prosecution witness 0884 by claiming that, well, when 0884 was talking about the combatant status of Hassan Delegui, he actually meant Bishar. He was not talking about Hassan Delegui. And you can see that on slide 20 of their brief, of our PowerPoint presentation. 0884 was not confused. He knew very well who Hassan Delegui was, and he knew very well who Bishar was. He didn't confuse the two. And this is a witness who lived very close to the Boeing market. And this you can see in transcript 57, page 36 onwards. The prosecution's failure to clarify a critical aspect of their evidence instead choosing to exploit ambiguities and capitalize on gray areas is also illustrated in their brief in relation to the Boeing mosque. The prosecution claims the satellite image and the expert testimony of P2193 shows that the mosque was set on fire during the relevant time period. Now, 2 points on this claim in their brief. First, your honors will remember that expert 2193, when he provided that answer, he testified with a newly revised location of the mosque, a newly revised location that he had changed the night before, further compounding the uncertainty in the answer he provided. But your honors will remember that at the end of the defense examination, he reverted to the original location of the mosque, and he agreed with the defense. Second, the prosecution counsel never inquired whether that building, the original structure, displayed any signs consistent with fire damage, nor was such a suggestion made. And you can see this on slide 22. So we would ask you to be very careful and to disregard the prosecution's claim that expert 2193 confirmed that the mosque displayed signs of fire. And now this brings me to my second point in relation to the Boeing mosque. And it's the manner in which the prosecution is twisting the evidence to fit their narrative. And in order to do that, they're downplaying the damages of the Boeing mosque. Because this is the only manner, if you downplay the damages, then they attempt to reconcile the evidence of defense witness 4011 and 4013 with that of P1339. So their first attempt is at slide 23, when they claim, at paragraph 581 of their brief, that Yekatom's element tried to set fire to the roof of the mosque, quoting 1339's testimony in court. That's not what 1339 said. He claimed that fuel was used to destroy the roof of the mosque He even claimed that he would have seen the mosque burn down. He says that the mosque was torched. And prosecution counsel made again that attempt on Monday by saying, and I quote in French, en tentant d'y mettre le feu avec un peu de pétrole. So they disregard the evidence of 1339 and they downplay it because they know he's contradicted by the evidence of 4011, 4013, and their expert witness. And they downplay it even more by claiming that 1339's account is reconcilable with defense witness 4011 and 4013 because it's after the rocket and the fire on the roof that the roof sheets and the mosque bricks were looted. That's not what 4011 and 4013 testified about. So what they do, and you can see this on slide 25, is that they're saying that paragraph 45 and 46 of defense witness 4011 are reliable because it's in line with 1339. She would have seen somehow the destruction of the mosque and the looting after the fire and the rocket that she missed. But they forget that at paragraph 43, she says when she arrived, the mosque was intact. And they forget that at paragraph 47, she also said she saw the destruction of the mosque from the beginning to the end. And that's how they attempt to persuade your honors at paragraph 557 and 591 of their brief that defense witnesses' testimony aligns with that of 1339, despite their clear contradiction. And I want to now watch on slide 26 a short video to illustrate how their attempt to reconcile defense evidence with that of 1339 is irreconcilable. And it's on slide 26 for your honors. And we don't need interpretation because we're not going to put the sound. I just want to have a look at the image. The transcript is on the screen for your honors to read. This is defense witness 4011. And this is how close she lives from the Boeing Mosque. And your honors have evidence that the newly Boeing Mosque was reconstructed at the exact same location as the previous one. And somehow, they claim that she would have missed a rocket, that she would have missed a fire. And they even go further. They're insinuating at paragraph 588 that the type and the quality of ammunition is unknown, as well as the manner in which it impacted the building. no matter how you want to describe it, a rocket is a rocket. And with this evidence, she would not have missed it. And the same flawed approach applies to 4013. He testified, to your honors, about his observations of the burned church in Gbayadumbia. And he didn't see any sign of fire whatsoever when he walked around the Boeing Mosque. They go further to salvage the credibility of their star witness, 1339. On the next slide, you'll see they claim now that we misled the expert by asking him whether what he saw on the satellite images was consistent with grenades and rockets. Because they claimed that that was not the evidence of 1339. We didn't mislead the expert. This is one of the numerous versions that 1339 gave here about the Boeing Mosque. That's how incoherent and unclear he is. Given the importance of demeanor in the credibility assessment of a witness, and given that the prosecution claims in their brief that 1339's account on the mosque was the unvarnished truth, I would like, with your honor's leave, to watch extracts where we can clearly see 1339's demeanor while he's prompted to answer questions on the Boeing Mosque. And this, Mr. President, is the part where I would need to go in private session for a maximum, and I timed it for a maximum of 11 minutes.
Yeah, so we have already agreed to that. So for the audience, there will be 11 minutes of private session, and then the audience could again start to follow. So we go to private session.
We are in open session, Mr. President.
If we can go back on evidence 2, Your Honors. Thank you. I would like us to now have a look, consider 1339 from a different perspective. When questioned at some point, and this was my point earlier, he's giving answers that are not fed, where he's talking about, and you can see it from the next slide, from slide 29, where in the first box on your left, you'll see that when he refers to an enemy, he's referring to instructions in relation to an enemy, and he's saying that the instruction relates to an enemy that's capable of killing you, so an armed enemy. And in the bottom, you'll see that he claims, and again, this was not fed by the prosecution, he claims that when instructions are given, he remembered an important detail. And that detail is that the Muslims, when he referred to instructions about the Muslims, it's the Muslims who are shooting. And this is, when you look at this, and you look at the 3 other insiders that testified in this case, they too spoke about instructions that were precise. They too said not to touch unarmed Muslims, that not to touch unarmed Muslims were the instructions that were given. And this was said by 1839. It was also said by prosecution witness 1786, and you see it on the right-hand side of the screen, where he said that instructions were not to target Muslim civilians, and who also said that they were trained during the training not to fight, not to target Muslim civilians. And this was also said by prosecution witness 1647, who said that they were instructed to fight the enemy and not the civilians. But what the prosecution does, they need to eliminate the obstacle to achieve their goal. So at paragraph 446, they're claiming that it's not because prosecution witness 1839 did not hear such an order to kill Muslim civilians, that it doesn't mean that the order was not given. But that's not what she told you. She heard the order, the instruction. It's not a matter of not hearing it. She heard it, and the order was not to touch Muslim civilians. He was precise, she says. But it's not the only instance where prosecution witnesses provide testimony that's unfavorable to the prosecution's narrative, and again they try to eliminate the obstacle. They did that with prosecution witness 1786 and 1647 at paragraph 488 of the prosecution's brief, where they're saying that their evidence is self-serving and should be treated with caution given their position, because they were exposed to criminal responsibility given their position as subordinate commanders. These are prosecution witnesses. They were never interviewed by the prosecution investigators as suspects. They were never told by prosecution investigators or the prosecution that we believe you might be exposed to criminal responsibility, so we're going to read you your rights. These individuals were the prosecution's own witnesses. They could have pressed them on the issue when they called them. They didn't. They could have confronted them with these instructions. They didn't. And these witnesses demonstrated openness when they were presented with specific video evidence of certain individuals, such as the one they rehearsed about Max Maidanda, and they did not attempt to defend it or excuse such behavior that they saw on videos. And finally, Your Honors, bearing in mind the prosecution's consistent recycling of the sentence that was fed to 1339, that Mr. Yekatom would have said to kill all the Muslims because all Muslims were Seleka. I want to end this part of my presentation on 1339 by recalling a contemporaneous video that's on Your Honor's next slide, slide 30. And you'll recall this video was played over and over again in the course of the trial. Just before, so the journalist goes, he sees Mr. Yekatom and he says, Mr. Yekatom is together with Muslim Seleka Suleiman Dauda. And they're entering a hospital hand in hand and they're saying, but you know each other? What's happening? A few weeks ago, you were both in your military attire shooting at each other. And Mr. Yekatom says, well, yes, we know each other. But if he's shooting at me, I need to defend myself. This brings me, Your Honor, to my next point of today's presentation, the manner in which the prosecution distorted the video evidence, in this case in their brief. Not only in their brief, but also during their closing statement on Monday and Tuesday. How they selectively framed the material to align with their narrative. And we're going to watch a few seconds of a video. And so just for Your Honors to understand, we're not going to watch all the videos that I selected because of time constraint. We're going to watch the first one, a very short extract, an extract that is cited at paragraph 62 of the prosecution's final brief, because that extract is recycled twice in the prosecution's brief, and it was also used on Monday by prosecution counsel. So we're going to watch that extract, and then I will explain the point I want to make in relation to this video and the manner in which the prosecution used it. And for the interpreters this time, the transcript is CAR OTP 2122-2292, line 22 to 29.
Vous êtes parti où quand Jotodien est arrivé?
Lui, quand il était venu, j'étais parti en banque pour aller prendre mon salaire et il m'avait arrêté et j'avais pris fuite pour traverser à Zongo. De l'autre côté, c'est Zaïre. Et c'est de là-bas qu'on avait des idées de démarrer notre mouvement par rapport à l'exercice des militaires.
Donc votre mouvement a commencé au Zaïre?
Non, on était traversé par ici. C'était ici.
Now, at paragraph 62 of their brief, they quote this video to support the assertion that Mr. Yekatom would have met his would-be deputy Wanjo and Baina in Zongo. There's nothing of that sort in that video. You can watch the entire video. He doesn't speak about them. They use again that video at paragraph 63 of their brief. And this time, they claim that Mr. Yekatom tacitly admitted their activities in Zongo. And you heard him. He said the opposite. The journalist asked him, so you started your movement in Zaire, in DRC, and this is at the bottom of your slide, of the screen. And he says, no, we started here in Central Africa. And they did it again on Monday. But what did they do? They stopped the video just before that answer. This is how you cannot trust them on the manner in which they use videos. That video is used again, and this is on slide 34 of your honors screen. And this time, it's to support the assertion that several witnesses confirmed that youth from Bangui, including from Boirab, Kokora, or Coac, joined the anti-Balaka on the 5th of December. There is nothing of that sort in that video. He doesn't speak about Boirab, he doesn't speak about Coac, he doesn't speak about Kokora. There's another example of misuse of video, and this is on slide 35, where you'll see that they use the video that's on the right-hand side of your honors screen to support the assertion that Yekatom and his commanders ordered the targeting and killing of Muslims. I'll invite your honors to watch that video. There is nothing in that video about ordering the killing of Muslims, about targeting the killing of Muslims, or about Mr. Yekatom saying anything of that sort. Neither can it support in any way the assertion at paragraph 690 of the prosecution's brief regarding the anti-Balaka's common purpose and criminal organizational policy. I want to move to slide 36. So in their brief, they use the video that's on the right-hand side of your honors screen. So at paragraph 483 of their brief, they use it to claim that this is the Bangba base. And then at paragraph 486, so 2 paragraphs further, they're saying, so no, but now it's Yanwara school base, the same video, same location. You'll notice through our presentation, and this brings me to my next slide, slide 37, the significant emphasis that the prosecution puts on key terms, such as, I said earlier, anti-Balaka and coordination. Senior anti-Balaka leader, that's a key term for them. Coordination, that's another one. And these concepts are very central to their narrative. And the reliance on these concepts is evident in their selective and often misleading use of videos. So this video, and again, we're not going to play it because it's too long. So it's Mr. Yekatom who's over the phone. He's talking to someone. And the prosecution uses it to support the sentence at paragraph 263 that in the weeks after the 5th of December attack, senior anti-Balaka leaders continued to liaise and coordinate. There is nothing in that video that enables you to know to whom Mr. Yekatom is talking to, let alone an anti-Balaka leader, even less a senior anti-Balaka leader. It's pure speculation from the prosecution's part. Now, as you are aware, these are examples from a collection of raw video that's in the prosecution's possession. But there's also the main documentary, which was edited because the main documentary was the one that was broadcast to the public. And at times, in their final brief, the prosecution relies on the Polish documentary because it better suits their argument. So they completely ignore the raw video, and they use the main documentary because it's consistent with their broader pattern to avoid what's clear and to twist the evidence. And they did that at paragraph 473, for example, of their brief, where they rely on an extract of the main documentary to support the paragraph where they claim that in the presence of Sylvestre Yagouzu and Modibo, Mr. Yekatom is called chief. And this sentence is in the middle of a paragraph where they talk about the anti-Balaka from Gobere, from Bosangoa. And the implication is that somehow someone on the ground is calling Mr. Yekatom chief, either Yagouzu or Modibo or someone from the anti-Balaka Gobere group. Now, if you watch the main documentary, it's the voiceover that uses the word chief. And then if you go back to the raw collection of videos, it's actually the journalist. And it's not written in the transcript, but I will ask Your Honor to listen very carefully to that raw video, 20652899, and you'll notice that the journalist says, Caporal chef, vous utilisez ça aussi comme technique? That's where the word chief came from. She's referring to Mr. Yekatom with his military rank. But they are implying in that paragraph that he's called chief because they want him somehow to be the chief of these individuals in paragraph 473. Even more disturbing, and this is the next slide. Your Honors will recall, and this extract was used more than once in the course of the trial. On the main documentary, there's an individual on his knees. And the voiceover says that he is punished and that he would have been killed later that night. A summary execution by Mr. Yekatom. And the prosecution uses the main documentary at paragraph 476 of their brief to support what? To support that Mr. Yekatom enforced discipline through violence, including by killing his own elements. And next to the word killing, there's a footnote, and the footnote refers to that extract of the main documentary. And Your Honors will recall that we found evidence that this individual is still alive. And this is on your next slide. Because Your Honors will recall that when you look at the raw video, not the main documentary, the face of the individual is not blurred. And we found his mother, who was shown the main documentary, who was shown the picture, and who confirms that it's her son and that he's alive. And this is defense witness 3015. And when we submitted her statement into evidence through a motion under 68.2, the prosecution said, well, it's of marginal relevance. And today they use this to support the assertion that Mr. Yekatom's discipline was as such that he was killing elements, and this is the source of their paragraph. This was the last video I wanted to use to make this demonstration with Your Honors. I cannot sit with you during your deliberation. I wish I could, but I can't. But what I'm asking you to do is to exercise extreme caution when you look at the prosecution's interpretation of the audio-video material in this case. I hope that through these examples, I managed to show you how they distort the evidence. And I hope that during your deliberation, you can take aside our BTM motions and responses as a guide through their erroneous interpretation of audio-video material. I'm told that there's 5 minutes before the 11 break, and I'm now moving to the North and South coordination.
I have the impression that it might be a good point to stop here for the moment. We have then the break until 11:30.
All rise, veuillez vous lever.